My name is Elizabeth Atwell, and I am a project manager with the Wallace Center's Food Systems Leadership Network team, and I'm going to be your MC for today's webinar, Making Sense of the Regional Food Systems Partnership Grant. I know we still got some folks trickling in, and you are probably all professionals at using Zoom by now, but just two quick tech checks. One is your mute button. Please use it. Please don't unmute unless you are a presenter on today's webinar. That'll help things move along. Also, secondly, if you want to move from seeing the kind of Brady Bunch style individual windows, you can click view in the upper rightmost hand corner of your screen and switch from gallery view to speaker view, and that will pin the presenter. Great, so welcome again. The idea for doing this webinar actually came from our team at the Wallace Center sitting down and looking at this grant opportunity and reading the RFP and instantly realizing that we had a whole lot of questions. And the Food Systems Leadership Network is all about connecting individuals and organizations and forging collaborations and partnerships across communities. So we were really, really excited to see USDA supporting this kind of work. But with this being a new grant, there were obviously a lot of unknowns. And we were asking pretty basic questions like, what are the priorities of this program? And how does USDA define regional? And how do they define partnerships? And how is this different from FMLFPP and other LAMP grant programs? And then we thought, if we have a bunch of questions, then chances are that a lot of other people do too. And judging by the hundreds of people that registered for this webinar, that was a good bet. So today we are lucky to be joined by members of the USDA Agricultural Marketing Services, current grantees from Alaska and from New Mexico, and even a former grant reviewer. So during our time together, we hope to dig into some of those questions and to explore USDA's goals for this grant program, to hear examples of successful partnerships and proposals, and to learn more about what grant reviewers are looking for in these proposals. I do want to know that one of our hopes and our goals for promoting this opportunity is to diversify the organizations that are applying for and receiving these USDA grants. As I'm sure our USDA colleagues will get into, 2021 is an exciting and pretty unique opportunity for this and other LAMP grant programs this year, and we hope that a wide range of organizations can take advantage of them. So on that note, I do want to say that we are not going to be going into the technical details of the grant program. We're not going to talk about grants.gov or how to register for a SAMS number or even be going into the details of the RFP. USDA has a boatload of resources related to that, and we'll be sharing some of the links to where you can go for more information. But we are excited today to be joined by some really amazing speakers. Since we have actually so many speakers and a lot to cover today and pretty little time, rather than introduce everyone individually, I've put together a bio cheat sheet with that I just put here in the chat box that you can click on and use that to kind of follow along as speakers are presenting. All right, so and to answer everyone's favorite question, yes, this presentation is being recorded and we do have time for questions at the end. Feel free to pose questions in the chat box as folks are speaking, but we will wait until the very end to get to any of those. Okay, so that's enough from me. We're gonna start off today by hearing from the very people responsible for bringing us the RFSP grant program, the USDA Agricultural Marketing Services. So now I'm gonna hand it over. So Patrick and your team, you can take it away.
Great, thanks Elizabeth. I'm gonna share my screen here really quick, everybody. Hide that. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're at. My name is Patrick Kelly, and I'm a lead grants management specialist with the Agricultural Marketing Service. My team, who is also joining me on the call here today, are the team that's responsible for administering the Regional Food System Partnerships Program. So that's the program that I'm going to be speaking to you all about here this afternoon. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we're not going to be able to get into too many of the details related to the technical aspects of the program. What I'm really going to be doing here over the next 10 minutes or so is just giving you a really high-level overview of the program itself and the structure of the program so that you have an idea of what it entails. But at the end of my presentation, there'll be a slide that has additional resources that you'll be able to access going forward. And just please understand that this will not be the only time you'll be able to approach me and my team to ask questions about the program. We're available to answer your questions at any time. So that contact information is also included in the presentation here as well. So with that, I want to share this graphic with everybody. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Farm Bill structure as it relates to the Regional Food System Partnerships Program, what the 2018 Farm Bill did was it took some existing grant programs within USDA and wrapped them up into a larger sort of umbrella program that they called the Local Agricultural Market Program. And then they put 3 current grant programs underneath this umbrella that you see here: the Farmers Market and Local Food Promotion Program and the Value Added Producers Program, which is actually run out of our sister agency, the Rural Development Group at USDA. But then it also created this 4th program under the LAMP umbrella called the Regional Food System Partnerships Program. So if you ever wonder what it looks like from a pictorial perspective in terms of how it's described in the Farm Bill, this is a good graphic that you can come back and look at any point to show you how it's all kind of connected. The Regional Food System Partnership Program is intended to support the formation and development of partnerships involving a lot of stakeholders from different sectors within the agriculture industry and sector in order to connect public and private resources to really encourage local and regional approaches in developing plans and food systems. And the grants themselves are intended to support on a broad level the activities that go into convening these partners in order to bring people together to develop business plans and strategies, and really a shared set of goals that the partners themselves develop as part of this convening process and this strategic planning process that they all buy into as a group, as a partnership, in order to identify priorities for the local or regional food system. The grants also are intended to improve communication and collaboration among food system stakeholders, both within the partnership and outside of the partnership within the food system, and to also increase economic opportunities for local or regional producers and food businesses within the local food system. Elizabeth posed the question during her introduction, what's a partnership and what's a region? So we thought we'd go ahead and add some definitions to the presentation here today for everybody. One of the primary differences between RFSP and the other programs under the LAMP umbrella is that these really are intended to be partnership grants. And by that, I mean, these grants are intended to fund activities at the partnership level, not at the individual partner level, if that makes sense. The Farm Bill actually defined partnership for the purposes of the program as an agreement between one or more eligible entities and one or more eligible partners. And you'll wonder what an entity is and what a partner is. And I'll just mention that those 2 terms are defined much more in depth within the RFA itself. So we're not going to be able to get into that too much here today, but I would recommend that you look at the RFA when you get a chance to get a greater understanding as to what an eligible entity is and what an eligible partner is. But for the partnership purposes, I want to stress that the Farm Bill stipulated that a partnership is an actual agreement between one or more eligible entities and one or more eligible partners. And an agreement can be a contract, it can be an MOU, it's some sort of formal document that establishes the work that the partners who sign on to it are going to engage in related to what the partnership is trying to accomplish, the goals that the partnership is trying to accomplish within the local and regional food system itself. So when it comes to actually applying for the grant, I've already mentioned that the partnership is the entity that's eligible to apply. But within the application packet itself and within the project narrative itself, the partnership will select an eligible entity or an eligible partner from within its ranks to actually submit the application on behalf of the whole partnership. And then within the application narrative, the partnership will specify which organization is going to be responsible for receiving and managing the award if they're selected for a grant. Elizabeth posed the question, what does region mean in this context? I added this definition here. It reads sort of tongue-in-cheek, but it's also pretty accurate in terms of the breadth of the types of regions that we saw in the first year of applications last year. It's an area that's typically needs to be bigger than a single neighborhood, but smaller than the entire country. And the reason I try to give that broad breadth of ability within the definition of a region is because the partnership itself within the Farm Bill gave the partnership the authority to define what the region should be for their project activities. So as USDA, we're trying very hard not to stipulate specifically what a partnership needs to describe as their region if they're trying to apply for this grant and seeking to get an award. But you want to, again, focus on a region or define your region as something larger than a single neighborhood within a location, but not trying to address an issue within a regional food system that engulfs the entire country at the same time. We talked about this a little bit already. The funds are intended to support partnership level activities and not the activities necessarily geared towards the work of a single partner within the organization. So some of the activities that are funded under this grant that aren't commonly funded under other programs are things like, again, convening multiple types of partners and stakeholders for strategic planning, the actual work of doing something like that and bringing different partners together to do these, to have these conversations and have these strategic planning sessions. That costs money and isn't typically covered under some of the other programs within USDA. And then another element that I want to point out here is the grant writing aspect. A lot of grant programs across the federal government don't support grant writing or program exploration on behalf of partners or entities to be expenses that are paid for with grant funds. This is one of the programs that actually supports that. There are some priority considerations for the grant as well. These are described directly in the Farm Bill language, and we also include it in the RFA. I'm not going to go into each one of these right now, but I do want you to be aware that we do consider these priorities once we get to the point of selecting awards, once they've gone through their peer review process. So we will look at the project narrative to see whether or not somebody has selected a priority consideration area on their form and then given us the information that actually justifies their selection. There are two different project types within the program. There's a planning and design project type, which is intended to be grant awards to partnerships who are in those really early stages of coming together and going through the process of convening and organizing themselves to develop processes for how they're going to address some of the issues within the local food system. And then there's an implementation and expansion project type that is intended to fund partnerships who are looking to continue or build on prior efforts that have already been conducted by the partnership within the local or regional food system. Here I give you an example of the types of activities that could be easily identified within a planning and an implementation grant type. Again, I'm not going to read these off to you verbatim, but you have this here. There's also a lot more examples in the RFA themselves, but I didn't want to include a lot of text in the slide here for everybody since we have such a limited amount of time for the presentation here today. The last thing I want to show you is the helpful links that I want everybody to have access to. And just to give you a real quick status update on the 2021 RFA for this program, the RFA is still going through internal clearance. It's in the final clearance stages. It will have a section at the beginning of the RFA that highlights all the changes from last year's RFA. That'll give you a really good idea of what's different based on the COVID stimulus funding package that was passed this last December, which added some funding to the program. But you'll want to take a close look at that. But since it's not currently published, I wanted to share these resources with you so that you had at least these to refer to. The best advice I can give you in terms of keeping up to date on whether or not the RFA for 2021 has been published, there are two things you can do. If you go to the USDA-AMS website, if you Google USDA-AMS, it'll be the first link that pops up on your search. Open up that web page, and then at the very bottom, you'll see a section where you can type in your email address and sign up to receive updates from AMS. Anybody who signs up via that system gets the notification when an RFA for one of our grant programs is announced. So you want to be sure, if you haven't done so already, to go in there and register in that system. But then the other thing you want to be sure you're doing is checking the second bullet here, which is the main website for the program. If you go to this website regularly and make sure you're checking it, once the RFA is ready to be published onto grants.gov, that will occur, as well as the update to the website that will include the RFA and the application information, and then that notification that I was just talking about that'll go out to all the email registrants via the AMS webpage. So all three of those things sort of happen simultaneously once the RFA has been approved and is ready for publication. So I just want to encourage people to take advantage of those resources so that you're kept up to date and you don't have to constantly keep asking other people if the RFA has been posted. You'll be able to get that information sent directly to you as soon as it happens. And then the very last thing I'll mention about this page is that first bullet where the webinars are located for last year's program. On that page, you'll be able to go to webinars that we held last year on how to register in grants.gov, as well as a webinar where we went into the details of how to apply for the program. A lot of the information is the same as last year, so you can use these as resources as you prepare to apply for the 2021 program. And as I mentioned, you'll get information in the new RFA once it's posted that specifically tells you what's changed as a result of the COVID stimulus funding that was added to the program this past year. So with that, I'm just going to highlight the contact information here. You can reach out to us with questions at any time, but I know I'm already over my time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick, and also to your full team. We know that you have your work cut out for you in the coming weeks and months in evaluating and then administering all of the awesome proposals that people on this call are about to write. So, thank you really for your service in making this grant opportunity happen at all. And next, we're going to spend the next section of this call hearing from a few 2020 Rfsp grantees. Obviously, 2020 was the very first cohort of these grantees, so we know that these projects are probably just getting off the ground. But we hope that by hearing about these partnerships, it can help shed some light on what makes a compelling proposal and an impactful project. So first off, we're delighted to get to hear from representatives of both funded projects in Alaska, the Alaska Food Policy Council and the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. So now I'll just hand the mic over to Robbie, Rachel, and Sue.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Can you guys hear me okay and see my screen? Okay, awesome. I'm going to try and talk really quick because we're smushing two projects in here at once. But first, I'm the director of the Alaska Food Policy Council. We got started around 2011, and I am the very first paid employee. So with that small capacity, we were able to leverage this into some grant funding to do more work around the state. And you'll hear from Rachel Miller here at the end of our presentation. She's our chair of the Food Policy Council and also an associate professor at Alaska Pacific University. And then just after me, we'll hear from Sue Unger, who is the Wellness Program Coordinator at the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. So let me get this rolling. So this is the name of our project, of AFPC and beyond, growing connections and building networks for greater food security. So I won't read everything on here, but I have this in here for you guys if you want to look at it later. Basically, our project, the final outcome is going to be a 10-year statewide food security action plan. So we've had quite a few projects that other organizations have done food system assessments, you know, kind of looking at, here's a little what we have, here's a little what we need, but without those actionable steps to get where we want. We're hoping to create this plan with the help of regional nodes. So we set up with the intention, we put in our grant, we were going to do 10 regional nodes and we ended up with 13 and are aware that we could probably have double that many to represent all the diverse voices and geographic locations around the state. So we wanted to set up these nodes to look at everything from the super hyper local towns of just 100 people to all the way up to looking at infrastructure and ideas in big metropolitan places like Anchorage. You guys might not think 300,000 is a big metro area, but is our biggest in the state. So we want to look at how our regions are connected, how we can share assets, what assets exist, and also look at things like social capital, financial capital, what type of those infrastructures existed as well. Like I said, our main goal is to come up with this 10-year food security action plan, but also to identify those assets, barriers, and capacities, and create a centralized database where people can go and say, oh, I'm looking for someone with experience in mobile slaughter units. Where can I go? Is there a unit that's available that's not being used? That's just one example. But also to improve our connection around the state. So getting more people talking to each other, sharing ideas, and see what comes out of it. So this is our very brief timeline. We're here in spring 2021. We've started our nodes, node meetings with some networking workshops, and we're going to continue with that for the next year. And then in next spring, we'll be doing our individual asset mapping sessions. So again, so we're looking at our project in 4 phases. We're doing our workshops right now on how to build inclusive networks, making sure folks that usually aren't at the table are represented, and trying to get a really diverse set of folks that are going to be working on this plan with us. These are our 13 partners right now. Just to give you a better view, these little markers here show where all of our nodes are at. And I was interested in Patrick's definition of region, and he said slightly smaller than the entire country. And I think Alaska just fits into that, if you could see the picture to the right. But I did want to point out, while we do have these 13 nodes, there's a vast part of Alaska, you see the western sections that we could have nodes at. We did have trouble finding partners there, and Rachel will get into that more in our lessons learned section. So our second phase is going to be a statewide survey that we're depending on all of our nodes to help us distribute. So each of our nodes is organized by an organization or an individual, but there's multiple leaders within those nodes. So there's, more than just those 13 organizations participating. So with that big of a network, we hope we'll get a wide breadth of participation. Then these community asset mapping workshops, we're going to be using some software to create these really awesome maps and databases of what our food system looks like. And then finally, with the help of our board members and our membership and our nodes, we're going to co-create this statewide action plan to build a more robust and inclusive food system for all Alaskans. And then I'm going to pass it over to Sue to talk about her project, and then we'll hear at the end our lessons learned.
Great. Thank you, Robbie, for that overview. So my name is Sue Unger, and I'm the wellness lead for the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association in Anchorage, Alaska. I've been at the organization for 20 years, working in different capacities. And today I'm just going to do a very brief overview of the project that we have under the Regional Food Partnerships Program called Building and Strengthening Local and Regional Food Systems in the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands region. We are so excited to have this grant opportunity. And I say we because not just our organization, but all the tribes we're working with. There are 13 tribes that we provide services for on the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands, and the map shows our service area. And then down in the lower right-hand part of the screen, it shows the 10 communities. So we have 13 tribes in 10 different communities in the Aleutian Pribilof Islands region, Bering Sea. Our communities range in size from like 25 residents in our smallest community to almost 4,500 in our largest one, which is Dutch Harbor on Alaska. As many of you know, this is a very remote area of Alaska. It's accessible only by airplane or boat. It's extremely expensive to travel within our region. We have a lot of interest in food security in our region. So our project goal is to promote the regional collaborations between our tribal communities and other entities to address food security and food system concerns and opportunities. And those partnerships that we have between tribes and the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association, which I'm affiliated with, and the other collaborators that we've brought into the project, which is the University of Alaska Institute for Circumpolar Health, Alaska Village Initiatives, which does rural agriculture in our communities, Aleutian Pribilof Island Community Development Association, Aleut International Association, which has the ear of the Arctic Council, and our 13 tribal partners. So we are working with our tribes to identify gaps and challenges, create priorities, and build these networks so that we can help develop a regional food systems plan. We have 3 objectives, and really the first and second one, we're looking at this first phase or year 1 of the project, and that's working with our tribes in the region to develop assessment tools and then to implement local food assessments and analyze those findings. All 13 of our tribes are interested in this project, and I don't know if we're going to be able to work with all of them. We promised that we'd work with at least half, and right now we're engaged with 4 of the tribes. The second year, the intent for objective 3 is to convene all our tribal partners at a regional-wide symposium, and that's with the thought that we've had that local discussion year 1, and now we can bring tribes together in the second year to have that discussion at a more regional level. So that's our objective for next year. Why are we needing this kind of project? I just put up some of the challenges and opportunities that our region is faced with. And a big one is transportation instability. Was it last year? In the last 2 years, we lost one of the most significant airlines that brought people into one of our hubs, Dutch Harbor on Alaska. There was no regular transportation for quite a while, and people were having to do charters and very expensive ways to get in and out. We lost that major airline. The ferry lost funding for our region for a while, and then are we going to have the ferry or are we not? So we have this big instability with transportation. on top of the fact that the weather in our region is extremely challenging with the high winds and rains. I already spoke to the remoteness, and all of these things have an implication for the high cost to store foods and low quality produce. You can see just a little shelf structure in the picture there of one of our stores. On the lower left picture, you see a picture of a greenhouse that was in one of our small villages that blew down with high winds. That's a challenge, the infrastructure and the winds. And then the top, these gentlemen carrying a reindeer, is to address opportunities. There's a lot of local foods and both traditional and domesticated. That's a reindeer that they were brought in the early 1900s around World War I and II to bring some stability in the food system. And there are like marine mammals there and a lot of other different local foods and plants. We also have one of the largest seafood processing industries in the nation or in the country in Alaska. So that's an opportunity, it's a benefit, and opportunities for mariculture gardening. I think I met my 5 minutes, but I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to collaborate with the Food Policy Council. What a great collaboration to get that technical support as we're navigating through this process. So thank you.
I just wanted to pipe in real quick. We found out, not through direct communication, but after grants were awarded, that Sue and her group were one of our regional nodes, and then we found out she got a grant too. So we're really looking towards even more collaboration once we figure out all the objectives of our grants. But we're going to pass it on to Rachel Miller now to go over our collective tips and insights for you.
Great. Thanks, Sue and Robbie. I think the big message here from lessons learned already, we're already past 2 of 6 of our networking sessions with our 13 nodes, and we've learned a lot about language used, partnerships how we could have crafted this differently, and what we got right going forward. I think it's really exciting to see the USDA funding dialogue. We know that food literacy is a huge challenge for so many in the country, and the fact that they're funding discussion is a big deal. There may not be direct economic outcome from these discussions, but there will be projects that do have economic impact as a result of these discussions. As an example, one of the conversations that came up from one of our northern nodes when we were discussing what a food system is, and we were defining common language, someone said, we're using extractive Western production-based language. What happens if my community defines our food system as inclusive and humans are a part of the ecosystem? And so some were very uncomfortable with a production-based vocabulary. We obviously have to scope things for the sake of the project to write a report at the end and to figure out how to move forward, but that we can have these very honest discussions statewide on Zoom, which is very low cost. This would be very different if we had to fund flight travel for everyone. We're already seeing some impact and some social capital being built amongst the 13 nodes. A couple other points I wanted to bring up. Thank you for fostering dialogue. And notes on defining your regions. I love that Patrick's point earlier was about, it's up to the partners to define what these regions look like. We got some feedback that, we went geographic based. Alaska is enormous. We span the coasts of the lower 48. And so we broke it down by region, geographic region, but there are so many ways to do it. I encourage applicants to look at cultural groups, language groups, look at food aid distribution areas. We have a pretty big divide in food security between on-road system and off-road system. Alaska has, last I checked, fewer road miles than Vermont. So we do have a lot of people outside the main road system, which when Sue just talked about the ferry system being cut, that means that people have to pay for their own planes to bring food in, which is insane. It's just so much money. So yes, already lessons learned. I saw some technical questions in the chat about the software we're using, and hopefully we can address those at the end or via the chat. So we didn't miss those. We will address those. And big message is that this grant afforded us the opportunity to have dialogue, create safe space for people to ask questions and criticize existing work constructively, and then create an outlet for moving forward. So those are, at this point, our tips and insights, and I hope that we will have many, many more moving forward.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I just learned a lot in 10 minutes about your projects and also about Alaska. So thank you again. And thanks for everyone who's putting questions in the chat. Please keep them coming. We might not get to everything at the end of this call, but we will try to address what we can. So next, I'm gonna welcome to the digital stage a very cool but also pretty rare partnership between a nonprofit and a funder. We're gonna travel south from Alaska down to New Mexico to hear from Denise Miller of the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association and Brian Crawford Garrett of the Thornburg Foundation about their partnership and their collective impact project in New Mexico. So Denise, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, can you hear me okay? And I assume my slides are being shared. So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. Our project in New Mexico is called Scaling Up New Mexico's Value Chain Coordination Network. And I am the executive director of the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association. And we were really very grateful to be awarded this grant for many of the same reasons that Alaska has just mentioned. It's really a unique opportunity to be able to, let me see if I can move my slides here. Sharing okay, but not able to forward them. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So today I'm going to briefly cover a little bit about our organization and why values are so central to this project. I'll talk a little bit about the partnerships from the grant, the project itself, and then a little bit about implementation. And time is tight, so it will definitely be a brief overview. And forwarding is not as easy as it should be. I don't know what I did to make it work before or how to make it go forward.
We've got a suggestion in the chat, hit play smart from your presentation.
Play smart.
Play start.
It just went forward, so I have no, oh, I see some arrows at the bottom here. Okay, so here we go. Thank you so much, whoever recommended that. But so a little bit about the NMFMA. We are a statewide organization that works to build the food system and create a healthier state through really supporting our ag producers and creating strong networks. And our core values, you know, this project really focuses on all of our values, but particularly building the web of partnerships, which is a big part of our normal work, our everyday work. But this project is really taking it to a new level. Brian Crawford Garrett from the Thornburg Foundation is going to address this financial piece. We were extremely lucky, and it's highly unusual that that you ever have the synergy, both in terms of timing, the right grant at the right time that is in place to support a federal grant for its match. And in this case, we were lucky that that was in place. And Brian will talk more about that. We've also had an incredibly robust relationship with our Department of Agriculture over the last 26 years, and that's been important for our ongoing work. Our partners on the ground. So this is where we start to get into the project. So our region is the state, and again, that fits with our mission because we are a statewide organization. We have 20 official partners, both public and private. They really are a diverse group. They are both food hubs who are our transactional partners, as well, and some CSAs, as well as support organizations, which we refer to here as our value chain coordination professionals. So those are organizations that are either steeped in policy work, or like the NMFMA, where we provide lots of services and technical assistance to farmers and retail outlets. There's, a number of support organization, NGOs across the state who are part of this. And yeah, and some of our food hubs also play a diverse role. Some of them are also support organizations, but the idea of this project was really aligning the collaborative work that was already taking place. I guess this was how we determined that it was an implementation grant and not a new project, where many of the partners, most of the partners, in fact, have really worked together for some time already on many different projects. And so this project is going to allow us to work together in some new ways and have hopefully break down some of the silos that are always a part of food system work, because organizations are always just, busy doing what they do. But this is a chance for everyone to really try to think as a system and do some deep planning and long-term planning. So those are our partners. And the project deliverables, we're really working towards the long-term economic viability of our producers. I feel like a lot of the objectives are kind of in some ways, they're your standard grant objectives, where we're hoping to increase producer sales, improving fresh food access, particularly among underserved populations, and then also improving the stability of our food hubs, which are a growing set of entities across the state. And they're really they're at an exciting point, I think, in their evolution. But the deliverables, while there are some things, a few things that we did promise within the grant, such as creating a product and pricing database, which is probably going to be the single largest deliverable, and as well as things like expanding our food safety program and our state procurement opportunities, creating metrics for our value chain coordination professionals, and providing development for food hub personnel. Most of those are a little bit broad in their nature, because what's really going to happen with this project, which is a collective impact project that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, the partners themselves are really going to be tasked with helping define those work plans and decide what the priorities are. So while deliverables are, a necessary part of a grant application and what you intend to accomplish, there's a lot of the finer points that will really be determined by our partners. So again, the framework for this project is a collective impact initiative. It is something that I had read a lot about. I felt kind of steeped in the theory of collective impact work. It is an entirely different thing to actually bring one to fruition. I am finding out it is very, very process oriented, and some of the most important things, which you can see around the circle here, is that the partners all have a shared vision that we're going to have mutually reinforcing activities, that there is a support system for the work, which is part of what this grant will fund. Having shared measurement tools, which is again part of this project. Communication is going to be an enormous piece of this project. With 20 partners, there's a lot of communication systems that we're just really at the beginning of setting up, and then a commitment to the long-term involvement of the groups who are participating. And this is all being done through a dynamic governance structure, which we're just really learning about. It means that there's a lot of teams. There's teams that perform all the different aspects of the work, including work teams, which, as I mentioned, are really the ones who are going to be tasked with developing work plans, and we're going to be doing asset maps and a lot of dialogue. I think as our Alaska friends noted, you know, a lot of the project is really looking at where your assets are, what are the barriers, and you know, how can you create more opportunities from those types of exercises. So in terms of implementation, you know, this is a 3-year grant, but we're really looking at it more as a 10-year project, at least in our backbone team. And as we look out at this work, it feels like it's probably a 10-year project. We see that there will be an ongoing evolution of the partners who may come and go. And so we're going to be working hard to set up some systems that will allow for knowledge sharing over time, and how we really, what we do with the data that we collect, and how we are able to kind of transfer that knowledge to new partners as they may join along the way. And then a couple of the things that we're also going to be keeping in mind very closely are both equity and policy considerations. And so those will really be integrated into all of the work, because again, for systems change, it usually involves some type of policy component, and we're working hard to make sure that farmers and communities across the state are really being represented. And then figuring out how, you know, what long-term resource development will look like for a project like this, because no doubt some of the work that will be identified will take additional resources. So yeah, we're just really thankful that this grant will allow us to focus on the relationships and the processes. It's a really unique opportunity to be able to take the work that, you know, where we're at and kind of go to the next level. And so we're very grateful. We're really just at the beginning. We'll have a lot more outcomes to share along the way, but we're kind of just at the beginning of onboarding all of the partners. Our support team partners have already been onboarded, and the first year will probably be largely devoted to some of the very basic, you know, activities such as asset mapping and things like that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our very good and dear partner, Brian Crawford Garrett, who is our funding partner. So let me stop there.
All right. Thank you, Denise. I'm going to now share my screen. Let's see. Oh, give me 1 second. All right. Can you all see that? We're good. Okay. I'll try to be on the quick side. So I'm Brian Crawford Garrett. I'm the Food and Agriculture Policy Officer at the Thornburg Foundation, which is a family foundation with a place-based focus on New Mexico. And we work across a number of different strategic priority areas, including food and agriculture. And within our food and ag work, we focus on 3 interrelated objectives: rangeland and farmland health, the economic viability of farming and ranching, and policy change to ensure a more resilient local food and ag system. And I want to talk a little bit about initially why, for us as a funder, the Rfsp was of interest. And first, I would say the grant priorities outlined in the Rfsp are really in direct alignment with our work, and especially that economic viability objective that we have. Second, we saw this as an important leverage opportunity. It's a multi-year significant federal funding source that can provide additional resources into the broader ecosystem where we're working and where we're partnering with so many organizations across the state. And it also, for us, builds upon current and previous investments, including supporting through match funding the USDA Food Link program a number of years ago, where we provided match for a grant made to La Montanita Food Co-op for a value chain coordination position there. And then finally, as has already been mentioned, the RFSP focuses on process and relationship building. And this is the soft infrastructure that, we also agree is so critically important to relocalizing our food system in more equitable and sustainable ways. So for all of those reasons, this really aligned with our priorities and our interests. So in terms of how we're making this work as a place-based family foundation funder, we provided a multi-year grant that was actually approved slightly ahead of the RFSP application process, but that has a timeline that is in sync with the RFSP grant. And we had actually anticipated a federal opportunity like this might be coming along. And fortunately, the timing worked out, and the Farmers Marketing Association could use a lot of our grant as match for the RFSP application. We're also engaged to some degree in the project implementation through a support role and thought partnership in the local food system space. And just to provide a couple of reflections from our end so far, and it is early days, but for us as a place-based funder with limited annual grant-making resources, we see important opportunities for philanthropy to engage with this type of program. The federal resources available here are a lot more than what we and other local funders might be able to provide. So I think that's a really important piece of it for us as a funder. However, at the same time, there are some challenges, especially related to the match. The funding needed for a 25% match is pretty significant, especially if you're looking at the implementation type of grant. Also, we don't typically do multi-year grants. We were fortunate in this case that we made a multi-year grant to the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association, but that's not our standard practice, and it's not the norm for a lot of our peer foundations either. And finally, I think it's important to acknowledge there are some inequities inherent in this process. The groups with more resources can more easily then access these additional federal resources. So moving forward, I think that's an important issue that's going to need some attention if the RFSP is truly going to address equity and barriers to access to this funding in a meaningful way. So I'll stop there. I have several other thoughts on kind of how this partnership has worked, but I know we're short on time, but we'd be happy to answer any questions that come up on kind of the funder perspective in this partnership program. So thanks. I'll hand it back to Elizabeth.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Denise. Brian, I really appreciate the point that you just raised, and it's really awesome to hear that coming from someone representing a funder, and just to see the representation of a funder coming on as a partner. So I'm going to keep us just moving right along in terms of time. And now we get to hear from Renee Katakalos, who is a Senior Director with Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Funders. And Renee served as an Rfsp grant reviewer in 2020 and is going to spend a little bit of time sharing some of the insights gained through that process. So Renee, I'll hand it to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks Elizabeth and Ellie and Susan for putting this together actually, and for having me join the group to speak here. So I do work with Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Funders. So Brian, Crawford, Garrett, who just spoke from Thornburg Foundation, they are a member of our organization. I'm really glad to see them represented here, and they are a real model for the way that funders can work to leverage the RFSP program. And I'm going to come back to some of the things that Brian said in a minute. But I was asked first to talk about what factors distinguished winning proposals, partnerships, or projects. So just to be clear, the review panels that that we as volunteers served on, my colleague at SAFSF, Bridget Dabrowski, also served on a panel this year. We were on different panels on different sides of the country, but we are kind of the initial reviewers that that go through the proposals based on a set of criteria and some scoring rubrics and kind of a process laid out for us by AMS to then funnel up to AMS kind of the top projects that come out of each group, and then the winning decisions are made there. So when we were doing our work, we didn't know what would be winning. I can only tell you what rose to the top from the things that we looked at, and from the conversations I've had with other reviewers. So so a few things. One, the variety and depth of partnerships presented. Again, this was a brand new thing, and as a lot of people have mentioned, there's been reluctance in the past to fund these kinds of partnerships, and I think a lot of people weren't even really sure like what would qualify and what to put in there. But as we've heard described, there are a variety of folks who can come to the table around this, and what we really looked for were again, a number of different partners that were bringing complementary expertise, skill sets, and networks to the table. It seemed to strengthen a proposal if the partners had, at least some of the partners have done some work together in the past. So they're kind of building on some relationships that already exist, but then also using this proposal as a springboard to kind of expand those relationships and bring some other folks to the table as well. We really were looking also for like real partnerships. We did see some proposals where people described partnerships that were at best aspirational in terms of connecting with groups, especially groups that might have been in communities or on the ground, and an organization was saying, well, we're going to partner with X, X, and X, but they hadn't spoken to X, X, and X. And they didn't have agreements really in place with those folks, and they didn't have a real plan for engaging those folks. And they certainly didn't have a plan that was going to be equitable for the way in which they were going to engage those folks. And so I would say that actually that was pretty clear to us where those relationships actually existed and where they didn't. And I think that when the real partnerships are there, it's also really important for it to be clear what role each of the entities and partners are going to play. It's a little bit confusing because, as I think Patrick referred to earlier, there are actually two words that are used in the program about eligible entities being the nonprofits who are actually applying for the grant, and then eligible types of partners, which include funders like Thornburg or academic institutions or other kinds of organizations in the community who would not on their own be able to apply for, be nonprofits that would apply. So I'm speaking broadly of all of the entities and partners involved, that it should be clear what role each of them is going to play, what resources each of them are bringing to the partnership. Some of that might be some in-kind funding. You know, the match can be provided not only by an outside funder like a private foundation, but also through, in some cases we saw, you know, the maybe personnel costs that certain partners were going to bring by loaning staff to a project, or other things like that were included in match. But it also needs to be clear, you know, what each partner is getting out of the partnership as well, that there's some benefit or some way in which the work of each of the partners is being elevated, and that they're clear about that, that there are support letters that show that each partner understands what the partnership really is about, and that has really been discussed. The issue of regional was one that that we stumbled across a little bit, and it is, you know, as has been pointed out, a broad category there, which is great, and it's up to the partners to define that. But we did stumble, and I don't know whether AMS is going to give any more clarification about this, but I think there was a question in the chat earlier about like a project that might involve a type of activity, but that is happening in different regional spots around the country, but trying to bring those together to address that. That for us seemed a little bit broader than what was than what we read into it, but it could probably use some clarification from AMS. I just wanted to speak a little bit to, I don't know if there are many funders on this call, but whether the funders are here or whether you are going to funders in your community to ask them to be a part of your proposal. I really encourage people to think broadly about what is meant by a partnership. I think, as Brian just pointed out, the financial match, the dollars are definitely important, but there are a lot of other things that a funder could do as a partner, you know, as a thought partner, as someone to connect you with other funders in your community, to connect you with maybe regional commissions or governmental entities that could support the work in some way, or come in, bringing other partners to the table to like strengthen the overall proposal. And I think that I would encourage you to ask your funders to think about those other resources that they could bring to you in addition to the dollars. We didn't see as many funders in the partnership role as we would have liked to, and that's some work that we're doing within SAFSF to try to raise awareness about this program among funders so that they are more proactively engaging with their grantees to help them put together you know, viable and winning proposals. So just a couple more little things I would say is, so there was the Wallace folks asked me for one question about what were red flags as we were reviewing. I think if you go opposite to what I said were the winning things, you can get a lot of that. But one I will pull out, I doubt it's going to apply to anybody on this call, but we definitely saw some projects that I would categorize as self-dealing. I mean, we saw people putting proposals together with organizations that were in some way connected to each other or to themselves, and writing people into projects in ways that just were not addressing a broad issue. So so that was clear to me and my group of people who were working on it. But it brings me to just kind of the final point I wanted to talk about is that you don't know the level of familiarity with regional food systems that the reviewers may have can vary widely. And to the question that was posed earlier of if you are not applying, if you're not applying for the grant, can you apply to be a reviewer? Honestly, ever since I did this experience, like every group I talk to who will listen, I say, apply to be a reviewer. Because I was lucky enough to be on a panel that did have people who had regional food systems experience, and each of our pieces of experience was kind of complementary. So we were able to bring different things to the conversation about what we were looking at. I know that my colleague's experience was different in that the other reviewers who were on the panel with her had a more production agriculture and kind of conventional background, and didn't necessarily get what some of the projects were purporting to do or understand the scale at which they were purporting to operate. So it's real important to have people who understand what the programs are trying to achieve actually reviewing them. So please, 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 if you are not applying, or if you know someone who's out there, or you know anyone you know who's eligible to do it, please apply. And I put the link in the chat earlier, and maybe the Wallace folks can add that to the follow-up things. I think by the same token, several of the previous speakers talked about the fact that these grant programs have seldom in the past funded relationship building, or collective impact, or the soft infrastructure, whatever kind of word you want to use. And so that's another thing that if the reviewers don't understand the value of that work, then that also colors the way that they review the proposals. Yeah, so I think I can stop there.
Renee, that was fantastic. And I
A reviewer.
yeah, well, I was about to say, I think really underlined like that point, like there's a lot of insight to be gained by being on the other side of these proposals and understanding what are reviewers being asked to prioritize, what are the different types of projects coming through, how are points allocated. So I did post that link back in the chat box and encourage everyone to check that out. If you aren't applying this year, it's a really great way to set your organization up with some deep understanding if you apply again. So we are a little bit behind time, go figure. I'm going to go through just a couple of questions, but I want to say from the outset, we're going to take some of these great questions that have been asked and write up some answers and publish that as an FAQ after this. So please don't fret if we didn't get to your question. We will try to get to it eventually and share that with everyone in a write-up. One question that I did want to ask to the grantees from Alaska and New Mexico is just about what went into developing these partnerships that you described. You've each listed a very long list of partners that span geographies and cultures, and even the ability to like access resources like Zoom. So if you could both speak in just like a quick minute about how long did it take to build these partnerships? Was this something that you were doing like from January till April of next year? Is this something that took years to do? And a little bit of what went into forming those partnerships?
Yeah, I'll speak for at least for the Food Policy Council. I mentioned that we started our council in 2011, and I will say that is probably the point where we started these partnerships. We have a board of 15 people who represent a wide range of, government agencies, education, nonprofits, food entrepreneurs, plus their whole networks too. So we really tapped into that, 9-10 years of formation of our council. So, but specifically to this project, we looked at the geographic, like who do we know, who have we worked with, who do we have good communication with, but also looked at who don't we have and how can we start developing some of these partnerships.
And I can also just add kind of similarly, the work of the NMFMA broadly involves us with most of our partners all of the time. So it's really been an ongoing, the association is 26 years old. I've been in my position 16 years. So, relationships are just part of, it's a mainstay of what we do. And even after we actually got started, there were a few partners. So we tried to do geographic, much like Alaska just said, Robbie. We tried to cover the state geographically. And after we got started, we realized there were a few holes in so we've added a few new partners that we missed when we wrote the grant. So I think it's ongoing, really.
Awesome, thank you. Renee, I liked how you described real partnerships and showing that there is, this is ground that has been tilled and worked before, but that also knowing that this grant opportunity is intended to deepen and expand those. Let's see, USDA, we got a question for you that, Patrick, I warned you this one would come up about amounts of funding for this year and match this year. We've heard some word that the COVID stimulus bill might have made some changes in 2021. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. The COVID stimulus bill did include funding for the LAMP programs, which again include FMPP, LFPP, the value added program, and this program, Rfsp, as well as reduced the matching requirement for those funds from the COVID relief bill to 10%. The Farm Bill language that established the LAMP program has different matching requirements for each of the programs. So, it's hard to, for example, I can't even remember the matching requirement for VAPG, but I know that each program has a slightly unique matching requirement as defined in the Farm Bill language. So, that's pretty much all I want to say about that right now, because like I said, as long as the RFA for any of these programs within AMS have been finalized, I feel like every time I try to say something, it changes 20 minutes later. So I don't want to put anyone here in that situation. But there will, like I said, there will be a section at the beginning of the RFA once it's published that lays out the changes from last year's RFA to this year, including what's going on with the matching requirement and the available funding for the program.
Great. Thank you.
I'm sorry I can't say more than that. I was hoping I would be able to, but we're just not quite there yet. And like I said, I don't want to give information that's going to be incorrect 10 minutes after we get off the webinar. So.
All right, well, we'll all sign up for the email service you mentioned, so we'll be the first to know when that information does go public. And I do want to reiterate a point that Patrick made earlier on. He shared their contact information as well as a list of resources from 2020 and some of what's new in 2021. So I know we've seen a lot of specific questions about, can funding be spent on honorariums? Can funds be regranted? And we will try to get to some of those questions in the FAQ, but urge you to also use this grant team as your resource to answer a lot of those questions. So I'm looking at the time and I know there's a bunch more questions. I'm sorry we can't get to it more. Again, we are gonna trying to respond as many as we can. We'll share out these presentations and the recording of this webinar. All of that is going to be posted to the Food Systems Leadership Network platform, and I just dropped the link in there for you to check out. And for anyone on this call who is not a member or a registered member on the new platform for the Food Systems Leadership Network, I really encourage you to go in there and sign up and explore it. This is a great place to connect with other people, including many of the people on this call that are doing this work, and to find resources like this webinar to help you in your work. Spring is USDA grant season, as we all know. So I also just wanted to give a shout out that the FSLN hosts a funding and fundraising discussion group. And that's a great place to continue some of the conversations we've had today about the RFSP and to ask questions of peers about this and other funding opportunities. And if you are new or unfamiliar with the Food Systems Leadership Network, we are going to be hosting a member meetup on Wednesday the 28th at 4 p.m. This is a really great way to connect with other people, connect with the network, learn about upcoming opportunities. And I think one of my colleagues can probably drop the registration link for that in the chat box. And then finally, my last request to all of you is to please take 30 seconds, maybe more realistically 60 seconds, but probably not more than that, to complete the survey for this call. That's a really important way of just getting feedback that helps us improve our programming. So we are at time. I want to thank all of y'all. Clearly, the Rfsp grant is a really important and a really exciting opportunity for our entire sector. Thank you all for being a part of the call today. Thank you for our speakers for sharing your wisdom and experience. I wish you all the best of luck in your projects and in your proposals.